This is that coaching video for those of you that are helping lead, facilitate, or teach an on-campus small group that's meeting on Sunday, September the 30th. So if that's you, you got the right video. Hopefully it'll be some help to you as you prepare to do that. Hey, go ahead, as we always talk about, and grab a couple of things. Get your the lesson. You should have received that in a previous email, and hopefully you've got that printed out so you can kind of walk through and look at that as we talk about some things here. Of course, you might want to grab your Bible and, of course, more importantly, something to take some notes with. And we're going to be wrapping up this series that we've been in for the past several weeks called I Will. And we've got a really great way to do that this Sunday. So you don't want to miss that, and want to encourage all of your small group folks to be there as well. It's going to be a great wrap up to this time. We'll also finish reading the book together, I Will. We'll finish reading that this week as well. And there'll be 3 different readings that we'll have available for you. That you can find those in the small group discussion guide in the readings area there. There are also, if you receive the daily devotion emails, they're included in that. Or you can go to the website or the app and pull it up and find them there as well. So looking forward to that. It's been a really, I think, a helpful growth time for us as a congregation and as individuals as we've gone through this series together, and both through the pre-teaching times on Sunday mornings, our small group interactions, and then, of course, reading through the book. And I think that God has used that to help us and encourage us and to position us as a congregation in a better way to carry out the mission that He has for us here in Mobile. And we're very excited about that, and I know you are too. Well, hey, go ahead and get that lesson in front of you and something to write with. And what I'm going to do is kind of give an overview here real quickly, point out a couple of things that may going to be of some help to you, and then we'll wrap it up, okay? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to be looking this Sunday as part of our Will series and our small group. We're going to be talking about the concept of togetherness and oneness. We're going to talk about how God brings all of us together with different backgrounds, different skills, different abilities, different personalities, a great amount of diversity in His church. And He brings us together and fits us together in just the right way to carry out His purpose. And that purpose is ultimately to point everybody to Jesus. And what we're going to be doing is looking at that in the sense of how He has gifted us, in the sense of how God has given us those abilities, a spiritual empowerment, a work of His grace in our life to do ministry in a way that fits together with others so that His purposes, His mission gets accomplished. And so that's what we're going to be looking at. And we're going to be looking at that from the passage of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 1 through 27. Now, let me just say right up front, that's a lot of content. And as you see in the lesson, there's a lot of content in that lesson. And as you work through that and prepare, you may decide, you know what, that's too much for our group. We can't handle those many verses. And that's fine. If that is what you choose to do, what I would suggest is you focus on the first 11 verses more in some more detail or maybe in-depthness, and then use the final part of that passage, verse 12 through 27, as a way to illustrate what you bring out in the first 11 verses, because that's exactly what Paul does. And you might just do some summary in that and bring out 2 or 3 points from that, or 2 or 3 statements that help with that. And because in the first section, Paul sets forth this thing. He says, I want you to be in the know. I don't want you to be out of the loop about this thing called spiritual gifts. Now remember, the church at Corinth was a church that was a very gifted church. It was a very talented church. It had a lot of very positive things about it. But it was a church that struggled with unity. It struggled with oneness and togetherness. And there were certain things that kept surfacing up. And there was some pride, and there was some arrogance, and there was some things about where the focus became them instead of Jesus, and all of that created some divisions in the church. And when you read through the book of 1 Corinthians, you're going to see that Paul is addressing those, and he speaks pretty straightforward to those. And here in this particular chapter, he's addressing the concept that they had grown so focused on spiritual gifts and who had what gifts or who had how many gifts, that the focus was on the gift itself instead of what the purpose of the gift was. And the gift was given so the church would function together effectively and in a healthy way to carry out God's mission. And so in these first 11 verses, he deals with that. There's a strong sense of oneness. There's a strong sense of unity. In fact, as you see in the lesson, we mentioned that there is a reference that Paul makes in a way to the Godhead, the Trinity, one God in 3 persons, and talking about the unity of the Godhead and God God the Spirit, God the Son, God the Father, and helping us understand that as that unity is displayed in the Godhead, so that unity ought to be displayed in God's church as well. And so that's a very important thing to grab hold of in those first 11 verses. Then in the latter part of the verses, he uses the analogy of imagery of a physical body and how we have all different parts of our physical body and how all the different aspects of our body, all our different organs, all our different limbs, and all the different things that make up us and our physical body, how all of that works together in a way to allow us to accomplish, to live out life. And he uses that analogy talking about the same way, all of us working together within the church. So just keep that in mind as you work through there in that way. Now, we do throw in a couple of illustrations there. A classic illustration to use to help with that is any kind of sports team. If you're into sports, anytime a sports team, whether it may be basketball or baseball or football or whatever your sport is, if it's a team sport, is that you can use that to illustrate how every person has a role, a responsibility, and as they all carry that out, the team is successful. The team accomplishes its goal, whether it's scoring baskets, scoring runs, or scoring touchdowns, whatever it may be. So the team reaches its goal. And those are always good illustrations to use. The military is the same way. Is you have a group of guys working together to win a battle. They all have different roles and responsibilities to play. A medical team, I think of a group that works together maybe in an operating room, and you've got the surgeon, and you've got the anesthesiologist, and you've got the nurses, and all of those there, the technicians, all working together so that the goal can be accomplished of performing this procedure on a person to help them be healthy and to be well and to live well. And so those are all illustrations that you can use in addition to the ones that we've placed within the lesson itself. Now, as we get into this too, you will notice in this lesson that though this is mentions or talks about spiritual gifts, and there are several listed in those first 11 verses, we do not spend time talking about those specific gifts. And that was intentional. And let me tell you why it was intentional. We didn't want to get bogged down and people getting bogged down and trying to understand what these different gifts are, looking at the details of those gifts, trying to figure out if they had that gift or not. What we were trying to do in this lesson is help us understand what Paul was really pointing about. And by the way, he didn't spend time explaining those gifts either. What he did was helping them to understand that God has given gifts to his church, and those gifts are to be used in a way that we work together. And that's a big word, together. As we work together, God's people come together, work together, we accomplish the purpose that God has for us, which is accomplishing the mission of Jesus, which is every man, woman, and child have an opportunity to hear and see the gospel and to respond to that. And Jesus himself said, I have come to seek and to save the lost. So we're working together for that mission. And so if a gift, by the way, a spiritual gift, if a spiritual gift calls attention or being used to call attention to an individual and they're getting accolades for that and recognition from that, and it's all about them, then either they don't truly have a spiritual gift or they're using it inappropriately, because as Paul points out, the gifts are to be used to point people to Jesus. It's not about the one who has the gift, but it's about the one who has given the gift. And so just keep that in mind as you work through there. Now, as I said before, we don't go into details about those different gifts that are mentioned here in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. By the way, that's not an exhaustive list or comprehensive list. We also have several other places in Scripture where these spiritual gifts are mentioned. You've got Romans chapter 12. You've got Ephesians chapter 4. You've got 1 Peter chapter 4. And by the way, when you read in each one of those, neither one of those has an exhaustive list of gifts. We put them all together and we maybe come up with a comprehensive list, but I wonder maybe if even not every gift is listed there in that way or somehow is not acknowledged. And here's the reason why, because the point is God's not wanting us to focus in on the gifts as much as focusing in on the purpose of those gifts there in that way. And as you look at this list, and maybe there will be questions that people raise or questions that people ask and about those gifts, and if possible, what I would suggest you try to avoid getting into those details. Maybe that could be a study for a different time. And perhaps in the future we can come back to this and and do some of that in that way there. But I would encourage them to focus. What we're looking at is the togetherness as we work together and how that gets carried out. Now, here's another thing to keep in mind about spiritual gifts, because sometimes people say, well, how do I know what gift I have? In fact, some of us use that as an excuse not to get involved in ministry. Say, well, I'm not sure what my gift is, so until I discover that, I'm not going to get involved in ministry. And that's just the exact opposite of what ought to be happening. And because the best way I know to discover your giftedness is to get involved in ministry. And as you make yourself available, and as you volunteer, and as you begin to participate in different ministry opportunities, God will bring those across your path in ways that where as you do them, you begin to see this is a natural fit for me, quote unquote. It's actually a supernatural fit for you, but this is a natural fit for me. And it's a way, and you begin to enjoy it. You enjoy it yourself, and you see that other people are benefiting from that. And when you find that sweet spot, so to speak, you're going to know that's your giftedness. And you need to get involved and further yourself in that way. But unless you get involved, unless you start stepping out and making yourself available, you're never going to really find that sweet spot. You can know all there is to know about spiritual gifts. You could kind of have a definition for every one of them and have gone through all of that. But you're going to be sitting there always wondering, is this my gift? And the only way to find that out is to get involved. That's why the second part of this passage puts the emphasis on how the parts work together. You know, the heart doesn't sit back there and go, I wonder what my job is. The heart starts doing its job, which is pumping blood throughout the system. And as it does that, it goes, oh, here's what I'm made for. I'm made to bring blood that has oxygen in it, by the way, that comes from the lungs, and carry it to the different organs to keep them healthy so they can do what they're supposed to do, so the brain can stay clear and think. And so the limbs, arms and legs are strong, and they can pick up things and take the body places. And so the eyes are clear and they can see, and the ears are open so they can hear, and the mouth and the tongue operate so they can communicate. You get the idea of what we're talking about there. And now just saying, keep the focus on that as you go through this lesson there in that way. And because here's what we're truly trying to, everybody has a part to play. Everybody has a part to play. In fact, Paul makes that clear. He says, each one has been given a manifestation of the Spirit. Each one, every person has been given that divine enablement, that gift of God's grace in our life. Not only the saving grace, but the enabling grace and the serving grace to get carried out in that way. And so we have a way, we have been given that, and we are to carry out our role and our responsibility. And again, don't sit back and wait for it. Get in there, jump in and go, and you'll discover what that is. And here's another thing to keep in mind too, because this is something that comes up at times in a study like this, is people may say, well, I would be involved in that, but that's not where my gift is. Folks, I'm going to tell you, that is the silliest excuse in the world to me, because here's why. Are you telling me because you don't have the gift of mercy, you shouldn't be merciful? Are you telling me because you don't have the gift of hospitality, you shouldn't be hospitable? Are you telling me that because you don't have the gift of helps, that you should not serve other people? You see where we're going with this, don't you? You know, we may have a gifting in a certain area, but that doesn't mean we aren't to be carrying out the effects of that gift or doing those other acts as well. You have a sweet spot where we are able to be most effective, but that doesn't mean we don't get involved in the other, or don't necessarily get involved in the other things as well. In fact, what I would suggest to you, there are two ways we ought to serve. We ought to be serving, first of all, in a way that fits us the best, the way is our sweet spot, where we are most effective and where the most benefit comes from. But secondly, we ought to be serving in a place where there's the greatest need. Because when we do that, the body works together, the mission is accomplished, or gives us being accomplished, and we're fitting into the perfect will of God for His church. Hey, have a great time studying this together. You may raise more questions than you answer, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's going to cause people to have to go to the scriptures themselves and begin to study and begin to look up for some things as well. Don't miss your application moment. Take some time as you're wrapping up your discussion time to see how does this get worked out in our individual lives and maybe as our life as a small group. Appreciate you. Thank you so much for what you do. Well, always, as I say, let me know how I can help you, because I'm here to serve with you and to serve you. All for the mission of Jesus, that every man, woman, and child would have repeated opportunities to hear and see the gospel. Have a great week.